talked about barriers, the problem, what gets in the way of being an effective listener. So now what we're going to do is we're going to talk about some key solutions. And as I talked about in the first little talk about listening, it's really about a mental discipline, a mental mindset that we need to have. And so these are some pillars of that mindset, some foundations. So let's talk about the first one. Focus on the message. Many times we focus on the messenger rather than on what the person is actually saying, because we're looking at how they look, we're looking at how they're dressed, we're looking at all kinds of different things that have nothing to do at all with what they're saying. And so we tend to, get focused on the messenger. And so focus on the message, on what they're actually saying, and then you can decode it better because you'll be able to say, okay, well, what he really said was this, and that's quite different from what I thought he said. Second thing that makes a good listener is to make listening a goal. Because I think if you start to learn how to listen to people and you learn to push yourself back, pull yourself back and let the other person talk, even in a public speaking situation, or maybe especially in a public speaking situation, give the audience an opportunity to talk to you a little bit. And that gets, number one, it gets them involved. And number two, they start to listen because they're being listened to. So it's sort of a two-way street. If I listen to you, you listen to me, it kind of goes back and forth like that. So try to make listening something you're working at, that you prize as a good, valuable technique, because you learn things and you build relationships, because people love to tell their stories and they love to be heard. And the more you do that, the more your relationships are going to be solid. Speech purpose. What is the purpose of that address? There might be one set of purposes that one part of the audience has and the other audience has another purpose. So this kind of goes back to what we talked about earlier. Every speaker is going to have a moment, a context, a situation. And so what tends to happen here is that we get stuck in, the purpose. What's he saying? What's he trying to do? What's his objective? And we need to stop doing that. We need to realize what his, he may have an explicit purpose. The speaker may have an explicit purpose, what he says his purpose is, but he may have what we call an implicit purpose, the one that he really is after. And so sometimes you have to be careful about that. And so listen carefully. Again, step back. Take your time. And, as speakers, we need to not confuse the audience. We need to be consistent. If I say my purpose is this, it needs to be really that, rather than doing something else. Ignore the bias, the distractions that we talked about in the first section. And this is so hard for people to do. It's hard for me to do, because you have certain preconceived notions based on past experience. And so you tend to absorb information, you tend to see information mentally based on that prior experience. Now, just because it's hard doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, because you need to listen carefully and say, what exactly are they saying, especially in terms of your biases. Because if you don't like a particular person or idea, maybe, this is the time when you need to make an active effort to pull yourself back. Or maybe you get distracted by a mannerism that they have. And I know students sometimes will do that. They'll say, oh, Mr. Willis, when you do this, it's I get distracted. And I said, well, I'm sorry, it's just part of my personality. And so they have to learn to step away from that, keep their focus on what I'm saying, not how I'm saying it. And that can be an issue. So if you want to be a really good listener, if you want to build quality relationships, which is what listening does for you, because it builds trust and it builds knowledge, then these are the ways to solve that problem and to become a better listener. Thanks, guys.